Welcome to the Defence Forces podcast, brought to you by the Defence Forces Public Relations Branch.
Hello and welcome to the Irish Defence Forces podcast. My name is Captain Kenneth Clancy, and today we're recording from the Irish Naval Service base at Haulbowline, County Cork, and we'll be discussing Operation Pontus, the Naval Service deployment to the Mediterranean, which began in 2015 and ended in 2017. In April 2015, the world watched in horror as the deadliest day in modern history played out in the Mediterranean Sea. Approximately 800 migrants fleeing war-torn countries and moving through North Africa drowned in seas off Libya. The international community and EU leaders decided that something needed to be done to combat such an extreme loss of life. Ireland's response to this migrant crisis was Operation Pontus. Operation Pontus was a bilateral agreement between Ireland and Italy to combat the loss of life at sea and bring people at risk to safety in Sicily. An Taoiseach at the time, Enda Kenny, and his government decided that Ireland would play its part. Etna was ready to go within 3 weeks of the government's decision to deploy. Today, we are talking to Captain Kenneth Minihane, Officer Commanding Naval Operations Command, who at the time was deployed as a senior national representative to coordinate between Italian and Irish military assets. Lieutenant Commander Alan Flynn, who was the search and rescue officer on Niamh during her deployment, which includes operating in the Rib on the 5th of August 2015 when a fishing vessel capsized, and Warrant Officer and Master at Arms Ray Duignam, who was the coxswain on Etna pre and during the first deployment to Operation Pontus and was the leading NCO in the planning, organising and motivation of personnel aboard the ship. Welcome on, gentlemen. Thanks very much for agreeing to talk to me today.
Delighted to be here.
So normally I kind of go through and sort of ask you your kind of backgrounds and that kind of stuff, but I think we've given a little bit of a flavour of that already. So I'm just going to kick into a few questions on Operation Pontus, which was the first deployment overseas of the Naval Service in history of the Irish Defence Forces, I believe I'm correct in saying. So how did the Navy react to the news that they would be deploying on Operation Pontus?
I think the Naval Service reacted very well. I was working in Force at the time, and Force is our standards section in the Naval Service, and we worked very closely with Etna and the crew on board that ship to deploy in what was a very tight turnaround. And it was due to the professional ability of the ship and all sections of the Naval Service and indeed the Defence Forces to be able to give support to that mission that resulted in what was a very tragic but successful operation for the Irish Defence Forces.
100%. So 3 weeks does seem like a really fast turnaround, you know what I mean, to deploy on a mission.
It was a very, very fast turnaround. We were actually on patrol on the Etna. We were 2 weeks into our MDSO, and we came in for our guardship weekend. So we laid up here for 2 days, and that's we were told we were heading to the Med. So kicked off from there. And
what was it like turning the Etna around from maritime defence and security operations to basically humanitarian search and rescue operations?
It wasn't easy, but ship's company turned to fairly quickly. The big one was to get the new personnel on board and bed them in straight away, get the administration in order, get our supplies down. We said to ourselves that we were going to draft our SOPs en route because we didn't have any. So that's what we did.
Wow. That must have been an interesting one, to draft them en route.
I think there was a lot of things that we had to consider that were not particularly obvious to us, and it was only with consultation with the director of the medical section and with other agencies in Europe, such as the Maltese, who we had a very good relationship and were experienced in migrant operations at the time, or humanitarian operations. And through discussions with them, we identified the important things that we needed to consider. And one of those things was safety of the crew from infection. And a whole raft of procedures had to be put in place. The equipment had to be bought and put on board and personnel trained in a very short period of time. And that was a huge challenge, but the crew, as always, stood up to that challenge and did the job in an incredibly professional way. But even down to the consideration of we were going to be taking children and indeed babies on board. We had never even considered the fact that we would have to bring nappies. We had to go down to that level of detail in preparedness to do the operations. And it was only because of the level of knowledge that we were able to garner from other agencies that we had worked with in Europe that allowed us to develop the SOPs, as the Warrant said, on the way down, that allowed the ship to operate in what was a very difficult environment.
Yes, yeah, and a lot of the images you'd see, these images are of Naval Service personnel and medics in like PPE of the type that we've probably become very familiar with during coronavirus, but certainly something you wouldn't necessarily consider before you go down that risk of infection and that kind of need to wear PPE and things like that.
And one of the points that it always springs to my mind is the fact that we were working in environments with people that were highly infected, and not one Irish sailor or soldier got infected in any way during that whole operation of Pontus. It was a credit to the standard of planning and professionalism of the Defence Forces to be able to put in place an operation such as Pontus in such a short period of time and protect its own personnel.
Well, I suppose from the perspective of kind of skill sets, what kind of unique skill sets that the Naval Service were able to bring to the mission? Have you any kind of observations on that?
Well, I think primarily the biggest skill set that we brought was our ability to manoeuvre at sea and conduct small boat operations. I think our experience of that over the last 75 years of the Navy's history fed into that quite seamlessly. You know, we had our procedures for launching and recovering ribs. You know, all those SOPs were there, so we were already at a very good standard in terms of our small boat operations, which primarily was the major operation that we had down there, was our ability to get boats and ship's personnel off the ship to a platform in distress and get those people back on board. Our ability to conduct those operations definitely stood to us before we went down. So we were quite confident in our ability in that sphere, certainly.
And I suppose would there be a significant difference between the conditions you would encounter, say in the Atlantic, I would presume would be very different to what you might encounter in the Mediterranean from a kind of a weather perspective and a conditions perspective?
The conditions were much different in the fact that we operate in very rough seas off the west coast, and we were working in much more benign conditions in the Mediterranean, but the one big difference was the temperature. To operate in the kind of conditions that we were operating in the Mediterranean required us to have different considerations for crew safety, hydration, regular swap around of personnel to make sure that they weren't getting exhausted. And we were talking about operations that were lasting for 14, 15 hours, recovering the personnel. Then we had to set sail with and mind those people on the deck to a port that was designated by the Italian authorities. So you could have some people working on operation for 36 to 48 hours with possibly only 8 hours sleep in that 48 hours. So it was an extremely difficult operation, but it just shows the level of professionalism that we have in the Defence Forces and the Naval Service, that we were able to conduct that operation in the way we did and save as many lives as were saved.
I suppose my next question does relates to that kind of high tempo environment that you've mentioned there, the kind of 8 hours sleep in 48 hours and you've mentioned the professionalism and how our personnel, but can we go in a little bit into how our personnel reacted to that, say, upswing in tempo?
Very positively. I remember the first barge we took, I think there was 600 people we took off that, and we had a lot of young crew members that never come across anything like this before, and there was a young baby handed into them, and that was the start, just a little infant.
And just had to react and
just
kind of
react
go with
and
that.
get going, get going.
So obviously there was an awful lot of kind of adapting to do, but we managed to achieve that in a very short space of time.
They did, yeah. We sort of teamwork and our values that we have, we rely on each other, and once we get that right, the rest of it just comes in naturally,
And from your perspective as the senior NCO on board the ship as the coxswain, did you see that a lot of guys having to lean on each other? Obviously, not only in difficult physical conditions, but very difficult emotional conditions that they had to rely on each other in very trying circumstances.
I did. I had to raise my voice twice in 4 months.
Wow.
That was it. There was never any other reason. That was something else. But on deck, when we were taking the migrants on board, everybody just got their shoulder to the wheel and got it done,
That's fantastic. It's a real testament.
Yeah. I think the the biggest thing was to see the reaction, as the Warrant has said, of the younger people who were just dropped in at the deep end, and they'd never had any experience of anything like this of any sort, and their ability just to get on with the job. And I think everybody realised very, very quickly that we were kind of serving a higher purpose, that we were there to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And once people got geared into that, and once people came to that realisation, they just everything just fell into place, and there was never any, certainly in my experience, there was very little or none. There was no moaning, there was no cribbing. It was a case of, we have a job here to do. People out there depend on us to be there for them and to provide a rescue and B, a certain level of care to get them to the other end. Yeah. It was, there was, more often than not, there was certainly smiling faces on deck than otherwise, So yeah. It was, everybody kind of had the attitude that, right, we're here to do a job, and the job is worth doing, and it's worth doing well. So, and that's what we did.
We talked about the preparation that we put in, but there was no level of preparation could have prepared anybody for the level of tempo and the number of people that we were rescuing. Like, we went down there with the view that we might be rescuing 250, 300 people. As the Warrant said, the first rescue was 600 people. Yeah. And that's a phenomenal amount of people to have on the deck. Make sure that they're secure, make sure that they're fed, make sure they have enough water. And that might have been for a 36-hour period that we had that many people while transiting back up to the port that was designated by the Italian authorities. And I agree with the lads. The level of pride in the crew of all the ships that went down there was phenomenal. They realised that they were doing an exceptional job, and they rose to the occasion unbelievably well.
Okay, so what I want to move into next is I just want to ask you, what was the working relationship like between ourselves and the Italian Navy during Operation Pontus?
I'll take that one there, Cian. It was an exceptionally good relationship. I went down as the senior national representative to join the Etna when she was finishing her deployment, so I could get a full debriefing from the captain, Commander O'Donnell at the time, and Pierce was able to give me a very, very good insight to what the operation entailed. And part of my job as a senior national representative was to liaise directly with the officer in charge of the operation from Operation Mare Sicuro, which was the Italian mission that we were liaising with. And I was there to try and buffer the captain's requirement to deal with both the embassies and the Italian authorities, and to allow him to manage the ship and to command the ship. So it became very apparent very quickly that the Italians had huge regard for the work that the Etna had done, and they viewed us very much as one of the strongest assets in the operation, and they called on us significantly during my time on all the ships down there. So I would say that the Italians were very impressed with the level of professionalism and ability that the Irish ships showed.
And as at a kind of more operational, more kind of tactical level, sort of like, did we have personnel on Italian ships in a liaison capacity, or?
Yeah, we had liaison officers Irish liaison officers on the Italian ships. That wasn't always the case. We withdrew them, I would say, after about the first 3 ships. But we always had an Italian liaison officer on board our ships, because we felt that was a better use of liaison, because we were able to communicate closely with the liaison officer on board, and he could express our opinions then through the Italian force commander's option.
100%, right, okay. And like we spoke a bit about, there was a very, very high tempo, and that that there was an awful lot going on, and the numbers of migrants that were coming on board ships was far in excess of even what the estimates had been. But just can we go into like say the operation tempo? Or what's a typical? I know there's probably no typical day, but a typical day on Operation Pontus was like, say, for the crew on board of it, one of our own vessels.
I'll kick off there. I mean, I was the search and rescue officer on Neve when we were down there in 2015, but I was also a bridge watchkeeper. So I stood the 4 to 8 watch from say 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. and it was typically during that period that the alert would be given to us that there was a platform in distress in our AO, and that that's where our operation would kick off essentially. So any time between 4 and 8, typically around 6 o'clock in the morning, we'd get a phone call or an alert to say, we want you to go here, we want you to go down to this position and kind of suss out these 3 or 4 PIDs that might be suspect or that we feel might need assistance. So from that time it kicked off, and from that time you had the ship's XO prepping all the personnel, getting them ready, getting them geared up, getting them suited up. It was my job then to get the ribs and my team ready. The XO then had to get all his deck crew ready. So that would take maybe about an hour. And as we refined things and as the operation went on, we were able to get that done an awful lot quicker. So, from getting the call to getting ourselves to be in a position to make an assessment of the situation, to getting on board or to getting the ribs off the ship and out to the PIDs, it could take anywhere between maybe an hour to an hour and a half. And from then on, depending on the numbers that we were faced with, it could take anything from 2 hours up to 12, 13, 14 hours before an operation was finished. And all through that time, you've both gone back and forth with personnel, with people who have been rescued. You've got the personnel on deck, registering those people as they come on, taking their personal details, finding out where they're from, getting their family kind of story, for want of a better word, and getting them placed, getting them fed initially, getting them water, making sure they had blankets, making sure that the family units remain together, and spacing them out and putting them onto areas of the deck that they'd be most protected from the elements. And once, we'll say, taken an extreme event where it would have taken 12 or 13 hours to get through all of that process, we then had maybe anything from 12 to 36 hours of a transit from the AO up to a port of safety. So already we're into 24 hours, 36 hours, and all through that 36 hours you've got the rotation of the watches on board, you've got the rotation of the deck watches on the upper decks, and providing the ongoing care for the people that we'd rescued. And then it's a case of getting into port and getting those people from the ship over and handed over to the NGOs that were waiting to take them take them to whatever centre that they were going to be housed in for a period of time. So anything from 24 hours to 48 hours, crews were constantly going, constantly on the move. All the below deck work had still remained. You had the engineers, the logisticians, the bridge watchkeepers. They all had to continue their normal routine, as well as maintain the safety and security of the people that we'd taken on board. So the operation didn't end until after we'd gotten in, after all the people had been disembarked, and after we disinfected the ship, given a small bit of downtime to turn the ship around to go back out to the AO. So it was...
Kicked the process off again.
Yeah.
And from a fatigue perspective, or I might just ask you, from a fatigue perspective, would you have seen it amongst the crew, like this tempo? Obviously, not take away from professionalism and the
You would,
job
yeah,
that was done.
definitely. There was one particular incident. There was a leading seaman, O'Leary, and we couldn't understand why she was getting so tired. But she was doing body searches, so she had to start at the shoulders, work down through the body, and back up again. And she was doing that 600 times. So her legs were absolutely wasted. She was body squatting 600 times. So
But you wouldn't.
you wouldn't even think of it.
Yeah, it wouldn't even cross your mind. You just
But as we moved along and as we developed, we started using the migrants to help us along. So even little things like taking off their life jackets and storing them in a bag as they passed by us, it meant that one of our guys was freed up and could settle down a little bit more,
Yeah.
So you were using the natural information that was coming to you to help you.
And you were streamlining your procedures, just based on experience.
The minute it kicked off in the morning, that was it. You were full on. You were like, and our skill set within the ribs, especially the small boats, as was pointed out, was at 100%. I mean, it was something that we were very good at. An example was we took 600 people on board, and the HMS Bulwark was working with us. So we were told to offload them again. So we just took 600 people on deck. Took us maybe 10 hours. Then we had to offload them again to put them out to HMS Bulwark. We were able to operate faster than them.
Yeah, which is mind-boggling when you think of it. Well, I presume the Bulwark is a larger ship.
It is, yeah. She's a landing craft, and we were able to offload our people faster than these guys.
And again, another testament, and we're seeing a lot of kind of examples of this professionalism and professional skill. The day of the capsize that was mentioned earlier, the fishing vessel capsize we mentioned earlier, appears to be like a standout day for the operation. Can we kind of drill down into exactly what happened on that particular day, and the kind of events surrounding it?
But whenever we got information from the Italians or whatever source it came in from that there was a vessel in distress, we would always proceed directly to that location. On that particular day, there was a number of vessels in the area that we had no indication of which vessel it was. There was a number of fishing vessels there, so we had to go and investigate each one. And when we came across this vessel, initially there was nobody on deck. We couldn't see anybody that made us indicate or indicated to us that was the vessel we were sent towards. And the captain started to turn away because we thought that it was just another fishing vessel. But just as we turned away, we started to see heads pop up on the deck, because they would all be told to stay down low to keep the centre of gravity as low as possible. So when we saw the heads started to pop up, then we knew that was the vessel we were looking at, or we were looking for. And the captain turned the ship back around towards the fishing vessel. Now you must kind of appreciate that we had to retain a distance away from the vessels that we were trying to rescue, because the last thing we wanted was to get close enough that people would consider jumping overboard and trying to swim towards the ship. So we were about 2 miles away at this stage. So as Alan already said, when we identify the platform in distress that we're going towards, then the procedure starts. There is a whole, the SOPs we spoke about at the start, they all kick in, and the whole ship's company is involved in those SOPs to prepare the ship to rescue people. And as we started the procedure, more and more people started appearing on this fishing vessel. And just as our boats started to leave the ship, and I was on the bridge at the time, the ship started to list, and she went to starboard, went to port, and all of a sudden she just started sinking. It happened extremely quickly. I was amazed at how fast that vessel just disappeared beneath the waves, and that resulted in what could only be considered as carnage on the sea, with about 350 to 400 people on the ocean surface, and we had 2 boats to try and deal with that. We also had to be very conscious of the fact that we couldn't risk putting our boats in danger. So they had to be very careful about how they operated on that particular day. So the captain decided that the launching of some life rafts we carried extra life rafts with us because it was something that we had considered in our planning phase. So the lads went off in the boats, and Alan would probably be the best man to tell you about that because he was the guy on the boat at the time.
I remember that morning, and as Captain Minihane just said there, that we were stood up, we were stood down, and I remember I was sitting in the shade on the upper decks, waiting for the go, and all of a sudden it was just all hell broke loose. So we got into the boat, we got launched, and within 30 seconds of us being in the water, you could see the fishing vessel teeter, list, back and forth, and I'd say we were within 150 yards of the vessel when she just went over. She went over to starboard, and it was really, really quick. And I can remember issuing a couple of expletives over the radio as the scene just unfolded in front of our eyes. I couldn't believe it, and the speed at which we had to react was nothing we'd seen before. Now, it was actually, that capsize had actually come on the back of another previous incident. So it was a really busy week, and we were quite highly tuned and well geared up. But we had to be very, very careful in both ribs that we didn't get too close initially, because so many people had gone into the water, and as we were making our approach, people were swimming towards us and trying to put their hands in the rib, drag themselves over. And my primary concern was that if enough people did that they'd wind up capsizing at least one of our ribs. So we had to manage that situation very, very carefully. And it was a case of getting as many flotation devices into the water as we possibly could, so that people had something to hold on to, or possibly even get onto themselves before they made an attempt, or before we made any attempts to pull people in out of the water. Again, the ship's reaction was very quick as well, in that the life rafts that we had brought with us, they were deployed almost instantly, and pretty quickly. I don't know, word must have been getting out from the ship to other agencies that we had a catastrophe on our hands here, that other agencies then started to pitch in. The Italian Navy had arrived pretty quickly. There was one or two NGO boats had arrived pretty quickly to provide assistance. There were helicopters in the air dropping life rafts, so it all happened very, very quickly. And I think the entire operation took about 6 hours, but we were on the go, rapid pace, really, really high tempo for a full 6 hours. And I can remember at one point, the adrenaline rush. I could feel the adrenaline rush in my fingers. My fingertips were like buzzing. It was not to be blasé about it or anything, but it was. You got that hit of adrenaline is something that I'd never experienced before. And our ability to get people out of the water, onto a life raft, onto our ribs, as quickly as we did, and to save as many people as we did was phenomenal. There was people there with various levels of injuries that we kind of had to prioritise. We had to even prioritise taking the living out of the water before the already deceased, just to preserve as much life as humanly possible. That was a long and that was a rough day. But it had come on, as I said before, it had come on the back of a long and a stressful week, where we had a previous incident where we kind of dealt with quite a lot of people and a lot of was a lot of death as well on the previous operation. So we were kind of in the zone whereby we knew now that, okay, there's the potential here for a significant loss of life, and we just had to, get our heads around that and just get to the living as quickly as we could and deal with the rest then thereafter. And there was a significant kind of clean-up operation afterwards, after we'd rescued the living. We had a significant kind of clean-up operation to do with the other agencies afterwards. So there was a lot to deal with that day.
And how do you prepare yourself mentally for that, sir?
There is no preparation for that, to be perfectly honest. The previous week, we had another operation where we had 600 or 700 in a large barge, and throughout the day we were getting reports of deceased people on board. And again, we just had to prioritise the living over the dead first, just to get them sorted, and then deal with the clean up and the mop up afterwards. And that was a particularly difficult evening also, and that's another one that went on well into the dark hours to get that operation over the line. But back to the day of the capsize, we'd kind of gotten reports that although we had 350, possibly 400 people entered the water, there was a lot of people that didn't make it off that boat at all. And there was I believe there was significant kind of there was legal issues after that, where there was court cases, and people were prosecuted for their actions, putting people into a situation where they shouldn't have been. So I believe there were prosecutions following on from actually evidence that we'd provided.
We were always conscious of the fact that we were dealing with criminal organisations that were smuggling people illegally and making a lot of money from it. So while our priority was to maintain life and to rescue people, we were always conscious of the fact that there was information that we could give to the Italians that might lead to a prosecution of smugglers. So we were always on the lookout for people who looked like as if they were part of the smuggling operation, and we would pass that information on. So it as Alan said, it quickly came to light that there was from people on deck telling the crew on deck that there was anything up to 350 people were in the hold, and the smugglers locked them in there. And the vessel was taking on water, and that those 350 people perished, and they had no possibility of making it out. You asked earlier on about how do you prepare yourself mentally for that. There is no way to prepare yourself for that kind of an incident. But the one thing that I will say is that the Defence Forces had a mechanism that sprung into action very immediately actually, and the PSS team met us in Palermo when we arrived in to disembark.
Personnel Support Service.
The Personnel Support Service, yeah. They met us in Palermo when we went in to disembark the living and the deceased persons that we had on board. And they sat down with us, and they did it in a very professional way, in that there was no, come on in here, you're talking to me. They engaged us in conversation in a kind of a very relaxed manner, and encouraged us to talk about what we had seen. And I think there's a tendency in the military to think we're all hard and we're tough men and women, but it was the first time that I'd ever felt that it was good to talk about it. Yeah. Because I felt that the professionals in the personnel support services that were there to assist us were giving us the opportunity to express what we had seen and talk about it and mull it over. And the one thing that really came to my mind was that they were really pushing the fact that everybody on board had done absolutely everything they possibly could and had worked above and beyond what they could do in order to make sure that as many people were saved as possible. So while you can't really prepare yourself beforehand, the support was there afterwards to make sure that our personnel were looked after as best as possible. And it's amazing, and unless you've gone to sea on a ship, you don't understand this.
Just going to say that actually, ships companies are very tight, very, very tight-knit community. And if you see a change in behaviour in somebody, it could be anything small, especially after an incident like that, it flags straight away. So you bring him aside or bring her aside and you have a conversation. You might have to bring it to the captain's table, you might have to bring it to the coxswain's table. But we're constantly looking out for each other, especially in an op like that.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And it's wonderful, obviously, to hear of the professionalism of as we have the personal support service. But that's just another thing to say, that there are supports there for people who've experienced difficult incidents like that. Just on the note of support, what was the reaction aboard the ships to, say, the upswing of public support, say, from home? Operation Pontus would have brought the Naval Service front and foremost, say, in the media and probably into the public eye in a way that maybe the Defence Force isn't normally. Was there much of a reaction on board ship from that?
It certainly buoyed a lot of people. Just knowing that our work was being recognised, and that there was people at home, waiting for us to come home. There was reports in the news that we were out there doing a worthwhile job. It certainly gave us an added lift when we needed it. The messages of support were coming in almost daily to say, look, people are proud of you, the state is proud of you, the people at home are proud of us, and that did help. And it was most striking, I suppose, when we came home, and our arrival at home, when we were coming in into Cork Harbour, the amount of people that lined the quay walls, both on the naval base and over in Cove. There was flags waving, there was people cheering, the kids were given days off school to come down and welcome us home. It was good to know that that people were getting an understanding of what we were going through as well. It certainly kind of gave us a boost and gave us that extra kind of motivation. Not that we needed it to carry on and to bring everyone home safely.
Yeah.
There was one particular story that I remember being told by one of the ship's officers that really kind of brought it home to me how much support we had from the Irish public, and that was an officer that was serving on the base at the time was going to Dublin for a meeting, and he was in uniform, and he stopped off in one of the service stations on the way up to Dublin, and he was buying his cup of coffee and his sandwich before he proceeded on his journey. And a family came over to him and offered to pay for the coffee and the sandwich because he was a member of the Naval Service. Wow. And when we got the news on board the ship at that time, that meant a lot to us.
Yeah,
it meant a lot to us that people of Ireland were willing to support us, even on the ground at home. That it wasn't just the people who were out there, but it also the people that were serving at home were getting that recognition as well. And when we came home and we were brought to the Áras Neutron to meet the President for Patrick's Day in 2016, that was a great day for all of us, to be able to go to the Áras and meet the President and to be recognised in that way was a great day for us, and we all did. Alan used the word buoyed us up, and it did really. It spurred us on to go on even further.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's inspiring in a certain way to think about it. That there's public support, from the rest of the country. I mean, it is so important to the organisation. Just from each of you, just as we kind of come closer to the end of the kind of discussion on Operation Pontus. So for each of you, your highlights or your lowlights of the actual operation you've experienced here. So maybe starting with yourself, sir.
For me, I suppose. It was a level of pride in and I would have gone on nearly every ship in the operation as part of force to train each ship as we went down. I spent the whole mission on Niamh, and then we identified that a program of training and evaluation was necessary for each ship that travelled to the operation after that. So I travelled with all of them. And I can honestly say that with no exceptions, the level of professionalism and pride that every ship's company took in their ship, in their mission, in their representation of Ireland was phenomenal. Alan said it earlier on, there was never any cribbing, there was never any moaning. It was just, let's get on and do this job. And to see that standard of work in a very, very difficult tempo and environment was absolutely phenomenal. The people that served on that operation in the Mediterranean were incredible.
Fantastic. So serving as inspiration to maybe the next generation that's coming forward for future operations. For yourself, sir?
There's an obvious low light, which is the operation that preceded the capsize. But I won't dwell on it. But the highlight for me is we saw the best and we saw the worst of humanity in those 4 months, and we responded. We gave our best response as a country and as a service and as individuals. Every one of us gave the best response that we could, and that was, I think, that was the takeaway from it. People dealt with stuff that they never would have dealt with before, and certainly haven't since. People had travelled from far and wide, almost all over the globe, to get to that spot where we were, and through horrendous conditions for months at a time. And we were the friendly face at the end of that journey, and we were the people that said, you're going to be okay, we're going to get you to where you need to be, but we're going to get you there safely as best as we can. And our reaction, day in, day out, that was the highlight for me.
And yourself, Warrant Officer?
So the highlight for me was the behaviour of the ship's company, from the captain down to the ordinary seaman. We secured on Thursday to sail on the Monday, and we divided up the watches that everybody would have some time at home to say goodbye to their loved ones. And on the Friday night, I was having a beer in my local rugby club, and I got a phone call from my captain that we were on a recall. So we were to go on the next day, on the Saturday. So at 11 o'clock on the Saturday, full muster of the ship's company, and we slipped and proceeded. We didn't know how long we were going down for. They were guessing 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. No one could tell us. We didn't know any allowances, and nor did we care. We just wanted to go down, get our game face on, and get into this operation.
Fantastic. I mean, that's a real inspiring thing as well. And again, another testament to the professionalism of the ship's companies that went down. So on the back of Operation Pontus, how would you say that operation prepared the Naval Service for the transition into Operation Sophia, firstly, but also for the transition into potential future operations for the Naval Service abroad?
I think Operation Pontus prepared us exceptionally well for the operation that we undertook, and in preparation for Sophia. It gave us exposure to operating with other first world navies, and to be able to operate cheek to jowl with those type of navies and be an outstanding performer was exceptional. And I was lucky enough to deploy to the headquarters in Rome of Operation Sophia just after our ship was deployed to Sophia. So I saw it from the operational side in the headquarters, how our ship performed. And everybody was hugely impressed with the performance of that ship and the ship that followed. So I think that it prepared us exceptionally well, and the proof of that is how well we performed in Sophia.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I'd obviously done Pontus in 2015, but I deployed on Sophia in 2018 on Samuel Beckett, and we knew going down there that we were able to operate with again, the first world navies, and that our attitudes and our procedures and, those attitudes and those procedures work in any environment, provided you have the right setup, and we had the right setup from the word go when we went on to Sofia again. And again, the praise and the plaudits that we got from FHQ and OHQ while we were down there were fantastic. We were able to work really well with the other navies that were deployed on the mission with us. The amount of the information that we were able to get to higher command from the tactical up to the operational levels was phenomenal, and we were like the little ships that could. And I think everybody should be equally proud of the terms that they spent on Sofia as they did on Pontus, because there were two different missions, and the attitudes and the work rate were equal on both, from my perspective, anyways.
And we will do an episode at a later date on Operation Sofia. Yourself, Warrant Officer Vinny?
It's very little to add to that, really. For me, all our training, our exercises that we had been doing back here, we proved to ourselves and to external agencies that we can mix it with the best of them. And we did.
That was an incredibly insightful account of the operation. It was really, really excellent. Thank you all very much for coming on and joining us.
You're very welcome. It's great to be part of the podcast. And I'd just like to say one last thing that I didn't mention earlier on. There was some talk during, especially 2016-17, about the ships rescuing people coming to Europe that weren't necessarily people that had the right to come to Europe. But the one thing that always inspired me when I was on the ships, and there's one particular picture that I will never ever forget, and it's of three young boys sitting on the gangway that was stowed on the ship. So they were sitting down, and we took a picture of the three of them together. Those three young boys did not make the decision to try and make it to Europe. And to be able to save the lives of those three individuals and all the children in particular that we did save was a very inspiring moment for all of us, I think, because they didn't make the decision whether they were going to try and make it to Europe or not. That decision was completely out of their hands. So, to be able to save children in particular was a very inspiring time for us, and thank you for allowing us to share this story with other people.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much, sir. For further information on the Irish Defence Forces podcast, check out our social media channels and military.ie. Serving members are also encouraged to check out this members area of military.ie. The Irish Defence Forces podcast is available on Spotify, Acast, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode was produced by Corporal Keith Harrison of the Defence Forces Audiovisual School. The Irish Defence Forces podcast will be back soon with new episodes. Until then, thanks for listening and stay safe.